the fairy horn sounded across the black water, and she turned to him with eyes that reflected the lantern strung along the railing. "Will you remember this night?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, white hair catching the moonlight, pale skin luminous against the darkness. "Long after the stars fade," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his immortal being. But that moment came at the end, not the beginning. The beginning happened 6 days earlier, when Gianna Zachariah arrived at Silverbrook Lake with her harp in the trunk of her aging sedan and a week of festival performances ahead of her. She worked as a hospice music therapist, spending her days playing for people in their final weeks, watching them slip away while she held their hands through song. The festival was her annual escape, 7 days where she played for celebration instead of goodbye. The lakeside town transformed every summer into something otherworldly. Lights draped from tree to tree. Stages appeared on the shore. Artists and musicians flooded the narrow streets, and for 1 week, the entire place felt suspended outside of time. Gianna checked into a small inn overlooking the water. The proprietor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, handed her a brass key and smiled. "You're in the blue room, same as last year." "You remembered. Some guests leave an impression." Mrs. Chen glanced toward the window. "Festival's already started. They say this year's going to be special." Gianna carried her bags upstairs and stood at the window for a long moment, watching the sun set over the lake. The water turned gold, then amber, then deep violet. She had learned to notice these transitions. In her work, she had learned that everything beautiful was also temporary, and that made it more precious, not less. She unpacked her harp and ran her fingers along the strings, tuning by ear. The sound filled the small room, and for a moment, she let herself simply breathe. The first performance was that night, an opening ceremony in the town square. Gianna wore a simple green dress and walked through streets already crowded with people. Lanterns bobbed overhead. The smell of roasted chestnuts and mulled wine filled the air. She found the performer's tent backstage and checked in with the coordinator, a frazzled man named Thomas who barely looked up from his clipboard. "Zachariah, harp, you're third in the lineup. 15 minutes. She nodded and found a quiet corner to warm up her fingers. Other musicians tuned their instruments around her. A violinist practiced scales. A singer ran through vocal exercises. The energy was electric, anticipatory. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage and settled onto the stool with her harp between her knees. The crowd quieted. She began to play, a traditional melody she had learned from her grandmother, and let the music carry her away. She did not see him in the crowd that first night, but he saw her. Hadrian Northcliffe stood at the back of the square, arms folded across his chest, watching the woman on stage with an intensity that made the humans around him unconsciously step back. He had ruled the vampire courts for 200 years, and in that time, he had seen countless musicians, countless performances, but something about her playing made him stop. Perhaps it was the way her eyes closed when she played, as though the music came from somewhere deep and private. Perhaps it was the expression on her face, serene and melancholic at once. Or perhaps it was simply that he was tired, so very tired, of remembering everything and feeling nothing new. He had come to the festival on a whim. His court was stable, his enemies subdued, and his second in command, a vampire named Lucian, had suggested he take time away. "You've been locked in that council chamber for 3 months straight," Lucian had said. "Go somewhere, do something. Remember what it's like to exist outside these walls." So Hadrian had come to Silverbrook, a place he had visited once decades ago. The town had barely changed. The lake was still dark and deep. The mountains still ringed the valley like guardian sentinels. But the festival was new, or at least he had never attended it before. He watched the woman finish her piece. The crowd applauded. She stood, bowed slightly, and walked off stage with her harp in her arms. He found himself following. The performers' area was off limits to the public, but no barrier stopped a vampire king. Hadrian slipped past the volunteers and found her packing her harp into its case, her movements careful and practiced. "You play beautifully," he said. She startled, then looked up. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. He was used to that reaction. His appearance drew attention even when he tried to avoid it. White hair that fell past his shoulders, pale skin that seemed to glow in low light, features that were too sharp, too perfect to be entirely human. "Thank you," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't see you there. I didn't mean to startle you." He stepped closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Humans could sense predators if he moved too quickly. "I'm Hadrian." "Gianna." She closed the harp case and straightened. "Are you a musician?" "No, a visitor." First time at the festival? First time attending, yes, though I've been to Silverbrook before. He paused. A long time ago. Something in his tone made her study him more carefully. He could see her taking in the details. The old-fashioned cut of his clothes, expensive but not quite contemporary. The way he stood, utterly still without the fidgeting restlessness of most humans. The coldness of his skin, though she would not notice that unless she touched him. You have an interesting accent, she said. I can't place it. I've lived in many places. That was true enough. Your playing moved me. That's rare. She smiled, and the expression transformed her face. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's observation. He tilted his head. What inspired that piece? My grandmother taught it to me when I was young. She used to say that music was the only thing that outlived us, that long after we were gone, the songs would remain. Hadrian felt something tighten in his chest. An optimistic view. Is it? Gianna picked up her harp case. I think it's realistic. We're all temporary. The things we create are the only permanence we get. And if you could be permanent, he asked quietly, if you could live long enough to see your own songs forgotten, to watch the world change until nothing you remembered still existed, would you want that? She looked at him for a long moment. That sounds lonely. It is. The admission surprised him. He did not usually speak so openly, especially not to humans he had just met, but something about her directness, her calm acceptance of impermanence, made him want to be honest. I should go, Gianna said, though she did not move. I have another performance tomorrow. May I walk you back to your lodging? She hesitated, then nodded. All right. They walked through the festival crowds together, Hadrian carrying her harp case despite her protests. The streets were alive with music and laughter. Performers juggled fire, dancers spun in elaborate costumes. Children ran between the stalls, their faces sticky with candy. Do you do this professionally? Hadrian asked. Perform, I mean. Sometimes. Mostly I play for hospice patients, people at the end of their lives. She glanced at him. I play to help them let go. That must be difficult. It is, but it's also beautiful. There is something sacred about being with someone in their last moments, about helping them find peace. She paused. I think it's taught me to appreciate time differently, to notice the small things, such as the way the light hits the water, the smell of rain, the sound of someone laughing. She gestured around them. Nights like this, they don't last, so you have to really be present for them. Hadrian said nothing. He had centuries of nights stored in his memory, perfect and unchanging. He could recall in exact detail a sunset from 1823, a conversation from 1904, a face from 1756. But he could not remember the last time he had felt present in a moment. Could not remember the last time he had noticed something small and beautiful and let it matter. They reached the inn, and Gianna took her harp from him. Thank you for walking me back. May I see you again? The question emerged before he could stop it. She smiled. I'm playing tomorrow night at the Lakeside stage, 8 o'clock. I'll be there. He was. And the night after that, and the night after that, by the third night they had fallen into an easy pattern. He would watch her perform, then walk her back to the inn. They would talk for hours, sitting on the dock with their feet dangling over the black water. She told him about her work, about the patients she had lost and the ones she still remembered. He told her carefully edited versions of his travels, leaving out the centuries and the blood. You're a very private person, she observed on the fourth night. They sat on the dock, stars reflected in the water below. You ask a lot of questions, but don't answer many. Force of habit. What are you hiding? Her tone was light, teasing, but her eyes were serious. Hadrian looked at her for a long moment. He had been alive for over 200 years. He had fought wars, ruled kingdoms, loved and lost more times than he cared to count, and he remembered all of it, every moment, every face, every word. The memories were perfect and permanent, and they haunted him like ghosts that never faded. I remember everything, he said quietly. Every conversation, every person I've ever met, every moment I've ever lived. It doesn't fade, it doesn't blur. It's all there, always, perfectly preserved. Gianna's expression shifted. That sounds like a gift. It's a curse. He looked down at his hands. I can't let anything go. Every loss stays fresh. Every goodbye remains raw. I've watched everyone I've ever cared about die, and I remember their deaths as clearly as I remembered the day we met. I carry all of it, all the time, and I can't set any of it down. Is that why you seem so distant sometimes? She asked softly. Because you're living in the past? I'm always living in the past. The present never feels real by comparison. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm against his cold fingers. Hadrian, look at me. He did. Her eyes were brown and serious and alive. This is real, she said. Right now, this conversation, the feel of the dock beneath us, the sound of the water, me holding your hand. Can you feel it? Yes. Then that's what matters. Not what you remember from yesterday or 10 years ago. What's happening right now? She squeezed his fingers. Memory is important. But if you're so focused on preserving the past that you can't experience the present, then you're not really living. You're just existing. Her words struck him like a physical blow. He stared at her, this woman who worked with dying patients and understood impermanence in a way he never had. She did not fear the temporary nature of life. She embraced it. She let things matter precisely because they would not last forever. How do you do it? He asked. How do you let people go? I don't. Not completely. I remember them. But I don't let the memory of them stop me from connecting with new people. I don't let grief freeze me in place. She tilted her head. Grief is love with nowhere to go. But the solution isn't to stop loving. It's to find new places for that love to flow. Hadrian felt something crack inside him, something that had been frozen for a very long time. I don't know if I can do that. You're doing it right now, Gianna said gently. You're here with me. You're making a new memory. And tomorrow, when you remember this conversation, maybe it won't hurt. Maybe it will just be something beautiful you got to experience. They sat in silence for a while, hands still linked. Finally, Gianna stood and pulled him to his feet. Come on, there is something I want to show you. She led him through the quiet streets to the festival grounds. Most of the crowds had dispersed. The stages stood empty, but the lanterns still glowed, casting pools of golden light across the grass. Gianna walked to the center of the main square and turned to face him. Dance with me. There's no music. Then we'll make our own. She stepped closer and placed one hand on his shoulder, the other still holding his hand. Just follow me. Hadrian had not danced in decades, but his body remembered the steps, the rhythm, the way two people could move together. He put his hand on her waist and let her lead him in a slow waltz across the empty square. She hummed softly as they moved, a melody he did not recognize. Her warmth seeped through his clothes. Her heartbeat thrummed steadily, proof of life, proof of the present moment. He focused on the sensation of her in his arms, the way her hair smelled like lavender, the small smile on her lips. What are you thinking? She asked. That I want to remember this. You will. You remember everything. No. He pulled her slightly closer. I want to remember this the right way. Not as something I'm already mourning, not as something I'm already trying to preserve, just as something good that's happening right now. Her smile widened. That's the idea. They danced until the lanterns began to dim, until the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. Finally, reluctantly, Hadrian walked her back to the inn. At the door, Gianna turned to him. Tomorrow is my last performance, and then the festival ends. I know. What happens after that? Hadrian hesitated. He had been avoiding this question, avoiding the reality that this week would end, that she would leave, that he would return to his court and his council chambers and his perfectly preserved memories. But standing there with her, the sky brightening behind them, he made a decision. I want to tell you the truth, he said, about what I am. You're a vampire. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. He stared at her. You knew. I suspected. You're very pale. You don't eat or drink anything when we're together. You move like you're not quite bound by the same laws of physics as everyone else. She met his eyes. And you talk about memory and loss like someone who's lived too long and seen too much. It wasn't hard to piece together. And you're not afraid? Should I be? Most humans are. I work with death every day, Hadrian. I've held the hands of people as they took their last breath. I've watched the light leave their eyes. A vampire doesn't scare me. She reached up and touched his face, her warm palm against his cold cheek. What scares me is the idea of never taking chances because I'm afraid of how things might end. He turned his head and kissed her palm. I don't want this week to end. Then don't let it. Not really. She lowered her hand but did not step back. The festival ends tomorrow, but we don't have to. I have responsibilities, a court to run, territories to manage, and I have patients who need me, a job that matters. She smiled. But people make long-distance relationships work all the time, and you can move faster than a human. Distance doesn't mean the same thing for you. Hope, fragile and unfamiliar, flickered in his chest. You would want that? Knowing what I am? I want you, all of you, the vampire king who remembers everything and carries the weight of centuries. The man who listened to me play and told me it moved him. The person standing in front of me right now, looking at me like I'm something precious. She took his hand. I don't need forever, Hadrian, but I would like more time, however much we can have. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, breathing in her scent, feeling her warmth, letting himself be fully, completely present. I can give you time, all the time you want. Then start with tomorrow, she whispered against his chest. Come to my performance, and afterward there's a ferry that crosses the lake at midnight. It's a tradition. People take it on the last night of the festival, and they make wishes for the year to come. Come with me. Let's make a new memory together. All right. She pulled back and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Then she slipped inside, leaving him standing on the doorstep as the sun began to rise. Hadrian walked back through the empty streets, his mind racing. He had spent 2 centuries locked in the past, unable to move forward because he could not forget. Every relationship had ended in loss, and he had remembered every moment of that loss with perfect clarity. So he had stopped trying. He had buried himself in politics and power, in the endless machinations of vampire society, because at least those were predictable. At least those did not require him to feel. But Gianna had cracked something open in him. She had shown him that remembering and living were not mutually exclusive, that he could honor the past without being imprisoned by it, that making new memories was not a betrayal of the old ones. He returned to his rented rooms as the town began to wake. Lucian was waiting for him, lounging in a chair with a book in his lap. You've been gone all night, Lucian observed. Should I be concerned? I met someone. Lucian raised an eyebrow. A human someone. Yes. Hadrian, you know how this ends. I know. Hadrian sat down across from him. She'll age. She'll die. I'll remember every moment we had together perfectly for the rest of eternity. I know all of that. And you're pursuing this anyway. She helped me understand something. Hadrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been so afraid of creating new painful memories that I stopped living entirely. I've been stuck, frozen, for decades. But she's right. The answer isn't to stop making memories. It's to make them matter, to be present for them, to let them be beautiful instead of just painful. Lucian studied him for a long moment. You're in love with her. I think I might be. After less than a week? I've lived for 200 years. Lucian, I know what love feels like, and I know how rare it is. Hadrian met his friend's eyes. I'm not going to walk away from this just because I'm afraid of how it ends. Every good thing ends. That doesn't make it less good. Lucian sighed and closed his book. Then I hope she's worth it. She is. That night, Hadrian stood in the crowd and watched Gianna's final performance. She had chosen a different piece, something original. The melody was haunting and beautiful, full of longing and hope tangled together. She played with her eyes closed, pouring everything into the music. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. She opened her eyes and found him immediately smiling. He smiled back, something he rarely did, and watched her take her bow. Afterward, they met by the dock. The ferry was already there, a small wooden boat strung with lanterns. A handful of other passengers waited to board. The ferryman, an old man with weather-worn hands, nodded at them. Last crossing of the festival, he said. You two coming? Yes, Gianna said, taking Hadrian's hand. They boarded and found a spot at the railing. The ferry pulled away from the dock, cutting through the black water. The town receded behind them, lights twinkling in the darkness. Ahead, the lake stretched vast and empty, reflecting the stars above. Gianna leaned against the railing, looking up at the sky. The other passengers were scattered across the boat, lost in their own conversations and thoughts. It felt like they were alone, suspended between earth and stars. She turned to him, her expression soft and open. Will you remember this night? Hadrian looked at her, really looked at her. The way the lantern light played across her features, the wind tugging at her hair, the quiet joy in her eyes. He committed every detail to memory, knowing that yes, he would carry this moment with him for centuries. But for the first time in a very long time, that did not feel like a burden. Long after the stars fade, he promised. She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. He kissed her back, slow and deep, tasting her warmth and life and humanity. Around them, the ferry rocked gently on the water. The stars wheeled overhead, and for that moment, nothing else existed. When they pulled apart, Gianna rested her head against his chest. What happens now? Now we figure out how to make this work. He wrapped his arms around her. You go back to your city, I return to my court, and we find time to be together whenever we can. Will your court accept this? A vampire king with a human lover? They'll have to. His voice was firm. I've spent 200 years doing my duty, putting the court first, sacrificing everything personal for the sake of politics. I'm not giving you up because it's inconvenient for them. She laughed softly. I like this version of you. Decisive, a little bit defiant. You bring it out in me. The ferry reached the far shore, a small landing with a single lantern marking the dock. The passengers disembarked, heading up a path that led through the woods. Tradition said you were supposed to walk to a clearing at the top of the hill, make your wish, and then take a different path back down to town. Hadrian and Gianna walked hand in hand through the dark forest. The trees rose tall and ancient around them. Moonlight filtered through the branches. They did not speak, simply moved together in comfortable silence. The clearing was exactly as the stories described, a circle of grass surrounded by standing stones open to the sky. A few other festival goers stood scattered around the edge, eyes closed, lips moving in silent wishes. Gianna led Hadrian to the center and turned to face him. Make a wish with me. I don't believe in wishes. Humor me. He took both her hands in his. All right, what should I wish for? Whatever you want most. Hadrian closed his eyes. What did he want? For 200 years, he had wanted to forget, to be free of the burden of perfect memory. But standing here with Gianna, he realized that was not what he needed. He did not want to forget. He just wanted to stop letting memory control him. He wanted to live in the present while honoring the past. He wanted to make new memories without being afraid of the pain that might come with them. He wanted this woman in his arms for as long as fate would allow. I wish for courage, he said quietly. Courage to love you without holding back. Courage to be present. Courage to let this matter, even knowing it can't last forever. When he opened his eyes, Gianna was looking at him with tears on her cheeks. That's a good wish. What did you wish for? The same thing I always wish for. More time, for everyone I care about, for my patients, for my family, for myself. She smiled through the tears. And now, for you. I wish we get enough time to really know each other, to build something real. We will. Hadrian promised. I'll make sure of it. They walked back down the other path, emerging on the far side of town just as dawn began to break. Most of the festival grounds were already being dismantled. Workers took down the stages and gathered the lanterns. The temporary magic was ending, returning to ordinary reality. But Hadrian did not feel the loss he had expected. Instead, he felt anticipation. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. He walked Gianna back to the inn one last time. She had to drive home that morning, back to her city and her work and her life. He had to return to his court to deal with the political tangles that had surely accumulated in his absence. At her door, she turned to him. When will I see you again? Soon. I'll come to you within the week. We'll figure out a schedule. He cupped her face in his hands. I meant what I said, Gianna. I'm not walking away from this. Good, because neither am I. She kissed him once more, then slipped inside to pack. Hadrian stood in the hallway for a moment, letting himself feel the ache of temporary separation. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt, the kind that came from caring about something, not from being trapped by it. He returned to his rooms and began to make arrangements. Lucian watched him work with barely concealed amusement. You're reorganizing the entire court schedule to accommodate a human woman? I'm reorganizing the court schedule to accommodate my life, Hadrian corrected. Something I should have done decades ago. The council will not be pleased. The council can adjust. I've given them 200 years of single-minded dedication. They can handle me taking some personal time. Lucian shook his head but smiled. She really did change you. No, she reminded me of who I used to be, before I let grief and memory turn me into a ghost. Hadrian looked at his friend. I've been so afraid of losing people that I stopped letting anyone in. But that's not protecting myself. It's just slow death. I'm done with that. Then I'm happy for you. Lucian stood and clapped him on the shoulder. Truly, you deserve this. The next 6 months were a delicate balancing act. Hadrian reorganized his court responsibilities, delegating more to his trusted advisors and setting firm boundaries around his time. He visited Gianna every week, sometimes more often. She lived in a small apartment in a city 3 hours from his court by car, but only 20 minutes by vampire speed. He learned the rhythms of her life. The early mornings when she made coffee and practiced harp before work. The afternoons she spent at the hospice playing for patients and their families. The evenings she came home exhausted and emotionally drained, needing someone to hold her while she processed the day's losses. He was there for all of it. He listened when she needed to talk. He held her when she needed silence. He learned to cook human food so he could make her dinner after difficult shifts. He sat in her living room and read while she practiced, content just to be near her. And slowly, carefully, he introduced her to his world. He brought her to the court, where she met Lucian and the other vampires who made up his inner circle. She handled it with the same calm competence she brought to everything, asking questions and learning the politics without being intimidated by the power dynamics. Some of the court members were skeptical. A human consort for the Vampire King was unusual, potentially problematic. But Hadrian made it clear that Gianna was not negotiable. She was part of his life now, and anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with him directly. No one did. Gianna, for her part, never asked him to change. She did not want him to turn her into a vampire, did not want immortality or eternal youth. She was comfortable with her humanity. With the natural progression of life and death, she just wanted to share whatever time they had. Don't you ever think about it? Hadrian asked one night. They were in her apartment, curled together on the couch, living forever, never aging, having unlimited time. Sometimes, she admitted, but I don't think I'd actually want it. I've seen what happens when people can't let go. When they fight against the natural end, it makes them bitter and afraid. She looked up at him. You're different now than when we met. Less haunted, more present, but you still carry so much weight. I don't know if I could handle centuries of that. You're stronger than you think. Maybe. But I also like the idea that my time is limited. It makes me appreciate things more. Every day with you feels precious because I know we don't have forever. She touched his face. If we had eternity, would this still feel special? Or would it just become routine? Hadrian considered that. He had lived long enough to see how immortality could dull experience. How easy it was to take things for granted when you knew you would always have another chance, another century, another opportunity. You're right, he said. The temporary nature of this makes it matter more. Exactly. She kissed him softly. So let's not waste time wishing for what we don't have. Let's just be grateful for what we do. It became their philosophy. They did not waste energy on what ifs or impossible futures. They simply lived day by day, building a life together within the constraints of reality. Gianna met his responsibilities with grace. When he had to cancel plans for court business, she understood. When he disappeared for days to handle territorial disputes or political negotiations, she did not complain. She trusted him, and he trusted her, and that foundation made everything else manageable. And Hadrian learned to be present in ways he never had before. He stopped constantly cataloging memories, trying to preserve every moment in perfect detail. Instead, he let himself simply experience things. He laughed more, he relaxed more. He found joy in small, ordinary moments that he would have dismissed before. A year after they met, Hadrian brought Gianna back to Silverbrook for the festival. They stayed at the same inn, walked the same streets, watched the same performances. But everything felt different now, deeper, more real. On the last night, they took the midnight ferry again. The lake was as dark and still as it had been the year before. The stars reflected on the water like scattered diamonds. They stood at the railing, hands intertwined, and watched the town lights recede. Will you remember this night? Gianna asked, echoing her words from a year ago. Long after the stars fade, Hadrian promised, echoing his response. But this time, he understood what that meant. It was not a burden. It was a gift. He would remember her. Yes, always. But the memory would not be a source of pain. It would be proof that he had lived, that he had loved, that he had been brave enough to open himself up to something beautiful despite knowing it would end. They made the walk to the clearing again, made their wishes again. This time, Hadrian wished for more moments exactly like this, more ordinary magic, more time to simply be with her. Years passed, 3, then 5, then 10. Gianna's hair began to show silver at the temples. Fine lines appeared at the corners of her eyes. Her hands, always so nimble on the harp strings, developed the first hints of arthritis. Hadrian watched her age and felt each change like a knife to the heart, but he did not pull away. He stayed. He held her hand through every shift, every marker of time's passage. He reminded himself that this was the price of love, the cost of letting someone matter, and it was worth it. Every moment was worth it. Gianna eventually had to cut back on her hospice work. The emotional weight became too much to carry full-time. But she continued to play, to teach, to share her music with anyone who would listen. And Hadrian was there, her constant supporter, her greatest fan. They did not marry in any legal sense. Gianna saw no need for government paperwork, and vampire bonding ceremonies required both parties to be immortal. But they held a private ceremony in the clearing at Silverbrook, witnessed only by the stars and stones. They spoke their own vows, made their own promises, and bound themselves to each other in the ways that mattered. Lucian stood as Hadrian's witness. Gianna's sister, a practical woman named Margaret, who had long since accepted her sister's unusual relationship, stood as hers. It was small and perfect and exactly what they wanted. The court gradually accepted Gianna as part of Hadrian's life. She attended important functions when her schedule allowed, charming the ancient vampires with her directness and a lack of fear. She never tried to play political games, never tried to leverage her position for power. She was simply herself, and somehow that won people over more effectively than any manipulation could have. "Your human is surprisingly competent," one of the council members told Hadrian after a particularly tense negotiation where Gianna's presence had helped smooth over old tensions. "She's not my human," Hadrian replied calmly. "She's my partner, and yes, she's remarkable." 20 years after their first meeting, Hadrian and Gianna returned to Silverbrook once more. It had become their tradition, their annual pilgrimage. The festival had grown and changed over the decades. New performers, new traditions, new energy, but the core remained the same, a celebration of art and music and temporary magic by the Black Lake. Gianna was 63 now. Her hair had gone completely silver. She moved more slowly, her joints stiff from arthritis and the accumulated wear of a life fully lived. But her eyes still sparkled with the same joy, the same appreciation for beauty. She still performed, though her sets were shorter now. Her fingers could not move as quickly as they once had. But what she lost in technical precision, she gained in emotional depth. Her playing had become even more moving with age, infused with the wisdom of someone who had truly lived. Hadrian watched her from the crowd, feeling his heart swell with pride and love and bittersweet awareness that their time was growing short. Gianna was healthy, but she was mortal. He could see the signs, could hear the slight irregularity in her heartbeat, could sense the way her body was beginning to wind down. He had perhaps 10 more years with her, maybe 15 if they were lucky. Not long at all in the scope of his immortal life, but he would not trade those years for anything. After her performance, they walked to the dock. The midnight ferry was waiting, same as always. They boarded and found their spot at the railing. The boat pulled away from shore, cutting through the dark water. Gianna leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, supporting her weight. "I'm getting old," she said softly. "You're getting distinguished." She laughed. "That's a kind way of putting it." "I mean it. You're more beautiful now than the day we met." "Liar." But she smiled as she said it. "I'm not lying. I see you more clearly now, all of you, the strength and grace you've shown, the way you've lived your life with purpose and compassion, the way you've loved me despite everything." He rested his chin on top of her head. "You're extraordinary, Gianna Zachariah." "So are you, Hadrian Northcliffe." They stood in silence for a while, rocking gently with the motion of the boat. Finally, Gianna spoke again. "When I die, I don't want you to freeze up again. I don't want you to lock yourself away and spend the next 200 years trapped in grief. Gianna, promise me." She pulled back to look at him. "Promise me you'll keep living, that you'll keep making new memories, that you'll let yourself connect with people. Promise me that loving me won't become another chain holding you back." Hadrian felt his throat tighten. "How can you ask me that?" "Because I love you, and I don't want my death to undo all the progress you've made." She cupped his face in her wrinkled hands. "You've learned to be present, to let things matter, to move forward while honoring the past. Don't lose that when I'm gone." "I don't know if I can do that without you." "You can. You're stronger than you think." She smiled. "And I'll be there in your memories, but not as a ghost that haunts you, as a reminder that life is worth living, that love is worth the risk." He pulled her close again, burying his face in her silver hair. "I promise," he whispered. "I promise I won't let grief freeze me. I promise I'll keep living." "Good." She relaxed against him. "That's all I ask." The ferry reached the far shore. They disembarked and made the familiar walk through the dark forest to the clearing. The stones stood silent and eternal, witnesses to countless wishes across countless years. Gianna took his hands and closed her eyes. "I wish for you to be happy," she said, "after I'm gone. I wish for you to find joy and purpose and maybe even love again. I wish for you to remember me with a smile, not with pain." Hadrian felt tears slip down his face. Vampires could cry, though he rarely had. But standing there with this woman who had taught him how to live again, knowing their time was running out, he could not hold back. "I wish for more time with you," he said, "however much we can have. And I wish for the courage to honor your memory the way you deserve, by living fully, by staying open, by being the person you helped me become." They opened their eyes and looked at each other. Understanding passed between them, deeper than words. They both knew this would likely be their last festival together. Gianna's health was declining. She might not live to see another year, but neither of them spoke of it. They simply walked back down the path hand in hand and returned to the inn as dawn broke over the lake. Gianna died 3 years later, peacefully, in her sleep. She had been sick for several months, her body finally giving out after a life fully lived. Hadrian had been with her at the end, holding her hand, playing the music she loved, helping her let go the way she had helped so many others. Her last words to him were, "Remember everything, but keep living." Then she was gone. The grief hit Hadrian like a tidal wave. For a week, he could barely function. He shut himself in his chambers and let the pain wash over him, feeling every moment of loss with the same intensity he felt everything. But then he remembered his promise. He remembered Gianna's wish. And slowly, carefully, he began to pick himself back up. He did not let the grief freeze him. He let himself feel it, process it, carry it. But he did not let it stop him from living. He attended court functions. He made decisions. He spent time with Lucien and the others who cared about him. He kept moving forward, and he remembered Gianna. Every moment they had shared was still there, perfectly preserved in his immortal memory. But for the first time, those memories did not feel like a burden. They felt like treasure, proof that he had loved and been loved, proof that he had been brave enough to open himself up despite knowing the cost. 5 years after Gianna's death, Hadrian returned to Silverbrook. He had not been back since that last festival, but standing in his chambers one evening, he had felt a sudden, overwhelming need to visit the place where they had fallen in love. The festival was in full swing when he arrived. Music filled the air. Lanterns swayed in the breeze. Artists displayed their work on every corner. It was exactly as he remembered, and yet completely different. He walked through the crowd, seeing everything through new eyes. The joy on people's faces, the temporary magic of the celebration, the way music and art could bring strangers together, if only for a week. On impulse, he bought a ticket for the midnight ferry. He boarded alone and found his spot at the railing. The boat pulled away from shore, and he watched the town lights recede. "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" Hadrian looked up. A young woman stood beside him, no older than 25, with a violin case strapped to her back. She had warm brown skin, dark eyes, and an open, friendly smile. "No, go ahead," Hadrian said. She settled beside him, leaning on the railing. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars reflect on the water. "First time at the festival?" she asked. "No, I've been before." "It's magical, isn't it? I perform here every year. I can't imagine missing it." Hadrian smiled. "A musician?" "Violinist. I'm Simone, by the way." "Hadrian!" They talked for the rest of the ferry ride, easy conversation about music and art and the beauty of the lake. Hadrian found himself enjoying her company, her enthusiasm, her genuine love for what she did. When the ferry docked, Simone turned to him. "I'm playing tomorrow night at the lakeside stage. You should come." "I might do that," Hadrian said. She smiled and walked off into the night, leaving him standing on the dock. Hadrian took the path to the clearing alone. He stood in the center, surrounded by ancient stones, and closed his eyes. "I'm still here," he said softly, speaking to Gianna's memory. "I'm still living, still making new memories, still letting things matter, just like I promised." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of lake water and pine. Hadrian breathed deeply and let himself feel the moment. The cool air on his skin, the sound of distant music, the awareness that he was alive, present, open to whatever came next. He did not know what the future held. Maybe he would attend Simone's performance. Maybe they would become friends. Maybe nothing would come of it at all. That was all right. The point was not to chase some specific outcome. The point was to stay open, to keep living, to honor Gianna's memory by being the person she had helped him become. When he opened his eyes, the clearing was still and quiet, but Hadrian did not feel alone. He carried Gianna with him, always. Not as a ghost or a burden, but as a reminder of what love could be, what courage could accomplish, what it meant to truly live. He walked back down the path toward town, toward the festival lights, toward whatever tomorrow might bring. Several years later, Hadrian found himself back at Silverbrook once more. It had become his tradition now, separate from his memories with Gianna, but honoring them all the same. He came to remember, yes, but also to experience, to be present, to let the festival work its magic on him anew each year. He had seen Simone perform a few times over the years. They had become friendly, though nothing more than that. She had her own life, her own dreams, but she always smiled when she saw him in the crowd, always made time to chat after her sets. This year felt different, somehow. Hadrian could not put his finger on why. The festival was the same as always. The music, the crowds, the temporary enchantment that transformed the town for 1 week every summer. But something in the air felt charged with possibility. On the third night, he attended a performance at the main square. A young woman played the harp, her technique flawless, her expression serene. She reminded him of Gianna, though she looked nothing like her. It was something in the way she approached the music, with reverence and joy tangled together. After the performance, Hadrian found himself wandering to the dock. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the black water. He stood at the edge, looking out at the lake, letting memories wash over him. 23 years since he had first met Gianna on this very dock. 23 years of learning to live again, to be present, to let go of the past without forgetting it. She had been gone for 8 years now, and he still missed her every day. But the missing had become something he could carry, something that enriched his life rather than diminishing it. Beautiful night. Hadrian turned. An older woman stood beside him, perhaps in her early 70s. She had kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a braid. Something about her seemed familiar, though he could not place why. "It is," he agreed. "You're the Vampire King, aren't you? Hadrian Northcliffe?" He tensed slightly. Most humans at the festival did not recognize him. "I am." "I thought so. You look exactly as my sister described you." She held out her hand. "I'm Margaret Zachariah, Gianna's sister." Hadrian's eyes widened. He took her hand carefully. "Margaret, I didn't know you attended the festival." "I didn't, for many years. But Gianna loved this place so much. After she died, I thought I should come, see what she saw, understand what made it special." Margaret smiled. "I've been coming every year since. It's my way of staying connected to her. She would have liked that. Would you walk with me? I'd like to talk if you have time." They walked along the shore, footsteps crunching on the rocky beach. Margaret spoke about her sister, about the years Hadrian had not been present for, childhood memories, family stories, the way Gianna had talked about him in those final months. "She was so happy," Margaret said, "in those last years. Even when she got sick, even when she knew she was dying, she never regretted choosing to be with you. She said you taught her as much as she taught you." "She taught me everything that matters," Hadrian said quietly. "She left something for you. I've been carrying it for years, waiting for the right moment to give it to you." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "She wanted you to have it here at the festival." She thought it would be meaningful. Hadrian took the package with trembling hands. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal. Inside, in Gianna's familiar handwriting, were pages and pages of notes, memories, observations, moments from their years together, recorded in her own words. The first entry was dated the night they met. There was a man at my performance tonight. White hair, pale skin, eyes that held centuries. He told me my playing moved him. I think he meant it. I think he's been alive so long that very little moves him anymore. But something in my music reached him. I want to know why. I want to know him. Hadrian flipped through the pages, tears blurring his vision. Every entry was a gift, a window into how Gianna had experienced their relationship. Her perspective on moments he remembered perfectly from his own point of view. Her thoughts and feelings preserved in her own hand. The last entry was dated a week before her death. I'm not afraid. I've lived a full life, loved deeply, made a difference in the world, and I got to spend my final decades with someone extraordinary. Someone who saw me for exactly who I was and loved me anyway. I hope he remembers me with joy, not just sorrow. I hope he keeps the promise he made. I hope he lives forever in the best possible way, not just existing, but truly being alive. That's all I've ever wanted for him. Hadrian closed the journal and held it against his chest. Thank you, he managed to say. She wanted you to have both perspectives, Margaret said gently. Your perfect memory of events and her imperfect human, deeply feeling record of those same events. She thought maybe together they would tell the whole truth. They do. They walked back to the festival grounds together. Margaret headed to her inn, and Hadrian returned to his own lodging. He spent the rest of the night reading Gianna's journal cover to cover, experiencing their love story through her eyes. It was beautiful. Messy and human and filled with small observations he had never noticed. The way he had unconsciously started humming the melodies she played, how his smile had gradually become more frequent over the years, the little domestic rituals they had developed, the inside jokes and comfortable silences. Reading her words, Hadrian realized something. His perfect memory had captured facts and images and conversations. But Gianna's journal captured something else, the feeling of those moments, the emotional truth beneath the surface details. Together, as she had intended, they painted a complete picture. He would treasure this journal for the rest of his immortal life, not as a replacement for his own memories, but as a complement to them. Proof that their love had been real and mutual and deep. Proof that he had mattered to her as much as she had mattered to him. The final night of the festival arrived. Hadrian stood at the dock, waiting for the midnight ferry. He had Gianna's journal in his coat pocket, a tangible weight over his heart. The ferry arrived, and he boarded. As the boat pulled away from shore, he found his usual spot at the railing. The stars overhead were brilliant, uncountable, eternal. He thought about the question Gianna had asked him all those years ago. Will you remember this night? He had promised he would remember long after the stars faded, and he had kept that promise. He remembered everything, every word, every touch, every moment they had shared, but the memory did not trap him. It freed him. It reminded him that he was capable of love, of growth, of change. Gianna had been right. Remembering and moving forward were not enemies. They were partners. He could honor the past while staying open to the future. He could carry his love for her while still allowing himself to make new connections, new memories, new meaning. The ferry reached the far shore. Hadrian disembarked and made the walk to the clearing one final time. He stood in the center, surrounded by ancient stones, and spoke aloud. Thank you, he said, for everything, for seeing me when I had forgotten how to see myself, for teaching me to live in the present, for loving me despite the complications, for trusting me with your heart. He paused. I've kept my promise. I'm still here, still living, still open, and I always will be. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying no answers, needing none. Hadrian walked back down the path as dawn began to break. The festival was ending. Workers were already starting to dismantle the stages. The temporary magic was fading back into ordinary reality, but Hadrian carried the magic with him, in his perfect memories, in Gianna's journal, in the lessons she had taught him, in the person he had become because of her. He would return to his court, he would continue his work. He would live his immortal life with purpose and presence, and someday, centuries from now, when the stars really did begin to fade and the universe wound down to its final silence, he would still remember her. He would remember the woman who had whispered, "Will you remember this night?" and had believed him when he answered, long after the stars fade, because some promises were meant to be kept forever. Years continued to pass, decades stacking into a new century. Hadrian ruled his court with wisdom earned through both centuries of experience and the concentrated lessons of loving Gianna. He no longer approached immortality as a burden to be endured, but as a gift to be used well. He mentored younger vampires, teaching them what he had learned about balance and presence. He established new policies that honored both ancient vampire traditions and the reality of the modern world. He built alliances and resolved conflicts with a patience and perspective that only centuries could provide. But he also made time for life beyond politics. He traveled. He attended concerts and art exhibitions. He read voraciously, always learning, always growing. He made friends, both vampire and human, and let those connections matter without being paralyzed by the knowledge that human friends would eventually die. He returned to Silverbrook every year without fail. It had become his anchor, his reminder of who he was and who he had promised to be. Sometimes he went alone. Sometimes Lucian accompanied him. Once, an entire delegation from his court came along, curious about this human festival that their king valued so highly. On the 40th anniversary of meeting Gianna, Hadrian arrived at Silverbrook to find the festival had organized a special memorial concert. A series of hospice music therapists inspired by Gianna's work had gathered to perform in her honor. Her legacy had spread far beyond the patients she had personally helped. Hadrian sat in the audience and listened to them play. Each musician brought their own style, their own interpretation, but they all shared something essential. The understanding that music could ease suffering, that art could make death less frightening, that beauty mattered especially in the hardest moments. After the concert, several of the therapists approached him. They knew who he was, knew about his relationship with Gianna. They wanted to hear his stories, to understand the woman who had pioneered techniques they still used. Hadrian found himself talking for hours, sharing memories he had held private for decades. The way Gianna had hummed while cooking, her habit of playing barefoot so she could feel the vibrations through the floor, the soft expression she got when a particularly difficult patient finally relaxed under her music. She changed the field, one of the therapists said. Her approach to end-of-life care, the way she combined clinical skill with genuine emotional presence, we all study her methods now. Hadrian felt pride surge through him. Gianna had wanted to make a difference, to help people, to leave the world better than she found it. And she had succeeded beyond what even she might have imagined. That night, he took the midnight ferry one more time, 40 years since that first crossing, 40 years since Gianna had asked if he would remember. He stood at the railing, the journal she had left him in his hands. He had read it countless times, but it never lost its power to move him. Her words were a bridge across death, a way to hear her voice even though she was gone. A young couple stood nearby, wrapped in each other's arms, whispering and laughing. They looked at each other the way he and Gianna once had, like they had discovered something precious and fragile and worth protecting. The young woman noticed him watching and smiled. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" "It is," Hadrian agreed. "First time on the midnight ferry?" "No, I've taken this ride many times." He looked out at the star-scattered sky, but it never gets old. "Are you making a wish tonight?" the young man asked. Hadrian considered the question. What did he wish for now, after all these years? He had health, power, purpose. He had honored his promises. He had lived well and loved deeply. He had turned his curse of perfect memory into a gift by learning to carry it properly. "I wish for others to find what I found," he said finally. "Someone who changes them for the better. Someone who teaches them to live fully even when it's hard. Someone worth remembering." The couple smiled and turned back to each other. Hadrian watched them for a moment, then looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, perhaps Gianna's spirit existed in some form. He did not know what came after death, not really. Vampires did not die of old age, so the mystery remained intact for his kind. But he liked to think that if consciousness persisted, if something survived beyond the final heartbeat, she would be proud of him. He had kept his promises, all of them. He remembered everything, but he had not let memory become a prison. He honored her by living well, by staying open, by continuing to grow and change and learn. The ferry reached the far shore. Hadrian walked the familiar path to the clearing. 40 years of footsteps had worn the trail deeper. 40 years of wishes had soaked into the ancient stones. He stood in the center and spoke into the night. I'm still here, love, still keeping my word, still being the person you helped me become. He smiled. I hope you can see it, wherever you are. I hope you know that loving you was the best decision I ever made, that knowing you changed everything, that I would do it all again, exactly the same, even knowing how it ends. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and indifferent and beautiful. The wind carried the scent of pine and lake water, and Hadrian stood in the clearing that had witnessed their private vows, feeling connected to something larger than himself. He was a vampire king, immortal and powerful. But he was also a man who had loved and been loved, who had learned that temporary things could have permanent meaning, who had discovered that the point of living forever was not to avoid pain, but to have enough time to truly understand what mattered. And what mattered was this: connection, presence, courage, love. Everything else was secondary. Hadrian walked back down the mountain as the first rays of dawn touched the sky. The festival was ending, as it always did. The magic was fading back into ordinary life, as it always did. But he carried the magic with him, woven into who he was, embedded in how he moved through the world. Back at his court, life continued. Political challenges arose and were resolved. New vampires came of age and had to be integrated into society. Old enemies stirred and had to be managed. The endless work of leadership rolled on, but Hadrian faced it all with the wisdom Gianna had given him. He stayed present for the important moments. He delegated the rest. He made time for beauty and joy and connection. He lived his immortal life the way she had lived her mortal one, fully, purposefully, with awareness that every moment was both precious and passing. And when younger vampires came to him, struggling with the weight of eternal memory, drowning in centuries of accumulated grief, he knew exactly what to tell them. Remembering is not the problem, he would say. The problem is trying to live in your memories instead of making new ones. The problem is letting the past trap you instead of inform you. He would look at them with understanding earned through hard experience. Honor what you've lost. Carry it with you, but don't let it stop you from living. That's not what the people you loved would have wanted. Some listened. Some needed to learn the lesson themselves the hard way. But Hadrian planted the seeds, offered the wisdom, and trusted that eventually it would take root. 3 more decades passed, then 4, then 5. The world changed around Hadrian in ways both subtle and profound. Technology advanced. Politics shifted. Vampire society evolved to adapt to new realities. Through it all, Hadrian remained steady. Changed, yes, he was always changing, always growing, but steady in his commitment to living well, to honoring his promises, to being present. He was walking through his court's gardens one evening, 93 years after meeting Gianna, when Lucian found him. There's someone here to see you, Lucian said. 2 someones, actually. They say you knew their great-grandmother. Hadrian raised an eyebrow. Oh? Lucian led him to one of the receiving rooms. 2 people waited there, a man and a woman in their early 30s. They had Gianna's eyes, her bone structure, her warm smile. Mr. Northcliffe, the woman said, standing. I'm Zora. This is my brother Liam. We're Margaret Zachariah's grandchildren. Gianna was our great-aunt. Hadrian's breath caught. I see the family resemblance. Our grandmother Margaret passed away last month, Liam said gently. Before she died, she asked us to bring you something. Zora pulled a small wooden box from her bag. She said you would understand what it meant. Hadrian took the box with careful hands. Inside was a pressed flower, dried and fragile, but still intact. He recognized it immediately, a wildflower from the clearing at Silverbrook. Gianna had picked it on the night they had performed their private bonding ceremony. He had assumed it was long lost. Beneath the flower was a note in Margaret's handwriting. Hadrian, thank you for loving my sister so well. Thank you for keeping your promises to her. Thank you for proving that love can transcend the boundaries we think define us. She was happy because of you, and that's worth everything. Live well. Margaret. Hadrian felt his eyes burning. He carefully closed the box. Thank you for bringing this to me. There's more, Zora said. Grandmother wanted us to tell you that Gianna's work is still changing lives. There's a foundation now in her name that trains hospice music therapists. Hundreds of people have gone through the program. Thousands of patients have been helped. Her legacy lives on. She would have been proud of that, Hadrian said softly. Grandmother said you might want to be involved. Liam added, if you're interested, the foundation would be honored to have your support, financial or otherwise. Hadrian looked at these two young people, carrying forward their great-aunt's legacy, connecting him to a woman he had loved nearly a century ago. This was what Gianna had meant about songs outliving their composers. Her work had rippled outward, touching lives she had never met, creating change that would last long after her death. I would be very interested, he said. Tell me more about the foundation. They talked for hours. Hadrian learned about the programs, the training methods, the impact assessments. He asked questions and took notes and felt himself getting invested in this continuation of Gianna's dream. Before Zora and Liam left, he gave them a substantial donation to the foundation. But more than that, he gave them his time, his attention, his genuine care. He told them stories about Gianna, helping them understand the remarkable woman whose blood ran in their veins. She used to say that the point of life was not to last forever, but to create something that would, Hadrian said. She succeeded beyond measure. After they left, Hadrian sat alone in the receiving room, holding the box with the depressed flower. 93 years since he had met Gianna, 85 since her death, and still she was teaching him. Still she was shaping his life. Still she mattered. Not as a ghost that haunted him, not as a wound that never healed, but as a foundation upon which he had built everything good that came after. That summer, Hadrian returned to Silverbrook for the 93rd time. He was walking through the festival grounds when he saw her, not Gianna, but someone who reminded him of her, a young woman playing harp on one of the smaller stages, her eyes closed, her expression serene. When her set ended, he approached. You play beautifully. She smiled. Thank you, I'm still learning, but I love it. What drew you to the harp? I'm training to be a music therapist, hospice care specifically. There was this woman, Gianna Zachariah, who pioneered a lot of the techniques we use. She played harp, so I wanted to learn. The young woman's eyes lit up. Her story is amazing. She helped so many people, and she had this great love story with the vampire king. It's kind of legendary in our field. Hadrian felt his heart squeeze. Is it? Oh, yes. They say he still grieves for her, almost a century later, that he visits the place they met every year, that his love for her changed how vampires and humans interact. She shrugged. I don't know how much is true and how much is embellishment, but it's beautiful either way. It's all true, Hadrian said quietly, every word. The young woman looked at him more closely, and understanding dawned in her eyes. You're him. You're Hadrian Northcliffe. I am. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful. It's not painful. He smiled gently. Not anymore. Now it's just part of who I am. Part of my history. Something that shaped me for the better. They talked for a while longer. The young therapist, her name was Elena, asked thoughtful questions about Gianna's methods, her philosophy, her approach to patients. Hadrian answered as best he could, honored to help preserve and pass on that knowledge. Before they parted, Elena said, Thank you for loving her the way you did, for proving that these kinds of connections are possible. It gives the rest of us hope. That night, Hadrian took the midnight ferry for the 93rd time. He stood at his usual spot at the railing, looking up at the stars. Will you remember this night? Gianna's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if she stood beside him. Long after the stars fade, he murmured his response. And he would. He would remember all of it. Every festival, every ferry ride, every moment of their time together, and every moment that came after. Not because he was cursed to remember, but because he chose to. Because these memories were precious. Because they proved he had lived and loved and grown. The ferry reached the far shore. Hadrian made the walk to the clearing one last time, his feet knowing the path even in darkness. In the center of the circle, surrounded by ancient stones, he closed his eyes and let himself feel everything. Gratitude for the time they had been given, sorrow for the time they had lost, joy at the legacy Gianna had created, pride in the promises he had kept, hope for whatever came next. I love you still, he said into the night. I always will. But I'm not frozen anymore. I'm not trapped. I'm living the way you taught me, present, open, grateful, and I'll keep living this way. For as long as my immortal life endures. The stars wheeled overhead, bearing witness. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying no answers, needing none. Hadrian opened his eyes and looked at the world around him. The clearing, the forest, the festival lights in the valley below, all temporary, all changing, all beautiful, precisely because they would not last forever. He understood now in a way he never had before. Impermanence was not the enemy. It was what gave things meaning. A moment that lasted forever would cease to be a moment at all. A love that never faced the possibility of ending would lose its sweetness, its urgency, its depth. Gianna had known this instinctively. She had lived it every day, and she had taught it to him, gift by gift, moment by moment, until he finally understood. He walked back down the path as dawn broke over the lake. The festival was ending, another year complete, another set of memories added to his perfect, eternal collection. But this time, when he left Silverbrook, he did not feel the bittersweet ache of farewell. Instead, he felt anticipation, eagerness to return to his court and his work, curiosity about what the coming year would bring, openness to new connections, new experiences, new moments worth remembering. Gianna had whispered, "Will you remember this night?" And he had promised he would remember long after the stars faded. He had kept that promise. But more importantly, he had understood the deeper promise beneath it, to keep living, to keep growing, to keep allowing moments to matter. That was the real gift she had given him. Not the memories themselves, but the wisdom to carry them properly. The courage to honor the past while staying present for the future. The understanding that love did not end with death, it transformed, became part of who you were, informed how you moved through the world. Hadrian Northcliffe, vampire king, immortal being, had learned how to truly live, and he owed it all to a mortal woman who had played the harp and taught dying patients how to let go and whispered questions under starlight. He would remember her long after the stars faded, but he would also keep making new memories, keep experiencing new moments, keep allowing life to surprise and change and move him, because that was what she would have wanted. That was the promise he had made. And that was the only way to honor a love that had transformed everything. The sun rose fully over Silverbrook Lake, turning the water gold. Hadrian stood on the shore and watched the light spread, feeling the warmth on his pale skin. Then he turned and walked away, carrying Gianna in his heart but not on his shoulders. Remembering everything but trapped by nothing, living fully in the present while honoring the past, long after the stars fade, he would remember, but more importantly, he would live. And that made all the difference.